What's up, guys? This is Chris from DraftDashboard.com.
Here are my DFS picks for MLB Sunday, September 5th.
These picks apply for DraftKings and FanDuel. Before I get started, please drop a like on this video and hit that red subscribe button
And hit that bell icon.
so you don't miss our new videos.
In this video, I'm going to go over my top DFS picks for today's MLB slate.
And if you stick around to the very end of this video, we'll use the Draft Dashboard tools to make a DFS lineup using the picks we just made.
Okay guys, we have a 10-game slate today. Now, I'm so sorry about yesterday's video. I've started to do NFL videos now, and I had two folders, created a new folder for MLB videos. Then I used my old folder. I just, out of habit, I selected the latest day, which was the 3rd. So sorry about that, guys. I did do a video yesterday. I had a bunch of picks. A lot of them did well. I feel really bad that didn't get out to you guys, but I won't make that mistake again. So anyways, we got a 10-game slate here tonight, or today, so let's get into it. At the pitcher position, I like Corbin Burnes with a 7% pitching advantage over the St. Louis Cardinals. Corbin Burnes is only giving up a .451 OPS versus righties, and he's facing 6 righties here today. On top of that, the Cardinals have only hit 19 of his last 80 pitches. That's a .238 batting average. He's $11,500 FanDuel salary and $1,800 less on DraftKings. Projected at 37.1 fantasy points here tonight. He has an ERA of 2.27. His record is 9-4 on the season, pitching an average of 93 pitches per game, averaging 43 fantasy points per game. He scored 52, 21, and 37 fantasy points in the last 3 games. So I like Corbin Burnes here versus the St. Louis Cardinals. Okay, now if you're looking to save some salary at the pitcher position so you can stack those bats, always a high risk, high reward play when you come down in salary at the pitcher position. But I think this guy's in a pretty good spot here to take a risk if you want to save some salary. Take a look at Brady Singer with a 7% pitching advantage over the Chicago White Sox. Brady Singer is only giving up a .684 OPS versus righties and a .484 OPS versus switch hitters. He's facing 5 righties and 3 switch hitters. And on top of that, the White Sox have only hit 7 of his last 40 pitches. That's a .175 batting average. Now, Brady Singer is only $7,000 FanDuel salary. He's $300 less on DraftKings. Projected at 29.1 fantasy points here today. He has an ERA of 4.87. His record is not that great, 3-9 on the season, but he's pitching an average of 86 pitches per game, averaging 23 fantasy points per game, and he's been on fire, scoring 34, 30, and 36 fantasy points in the last 3 games. So I like Brady Singer as a high-risk, high-reward pitcher here versus the Chicago White Sox. Okay, let's take a look at the catcher first base position. I like Joey Votto with a 59% batting advantage over a low-salary pitcher, Casey Mize. Joey Votto is batting 29% better versus righty pitchers. He's batting a .941 OPS versus righties. And Casey Mize, he pitches 30% worse to lefties as he does righties, giving up a .844 OPS versus lefties. Now, there's no at-bats versus Mize yet, and Joey Votto is $3,600 FanDuel salary, $1,400 more on DraftKings, projected at 10.1 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 12 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 16, 9, and 16 fantasy points in his last 3 games. So I like Joey Votto here versus Casey Mize. Okay, now here's a value play. I like Colin Moran with a 3% batting advantage over a low salary pitcher, Zach Davies. Colin Moran is batting 21% better versus righty pitchers, batting a .828 OPS versus righties, and Zach Davies is giving up a .639 OPS versus lefties. Now I like this pick because Colin Moran is 7 for 21, batting a .333 batting average and a 1.078 OPS versus Davies. 2 of those 7 hits are for home runs, and he's only $2,800 FanDuel salary and only $600 more on DraftKings. Projected at 10.4 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 8 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 13, 6, and 29 fantasy points in the last 3 games. So I like Colin Moran here versus Zach Davies. Okay, let's take a look at the second base position. Another value play for you. I like Luis Urias with a 38% batting advantage over a low salary pitcher, John Lester. Luis Urias is batting 8% better versus lefty pitchers, batting a .731 OPS versus lefties. And John Lester, he pitches his worst ball by far to righty batters, 30% worse than his other pitches, giving up a .900 OPS versus righties. And I like this pick because Luis Urias is 5 for 8, batting a .625 batting average and a 1.542 OPS versus Lester. And he's only $2,400 FanDuel salary. He's $1,500 more on DraftKings, projected at 8.6 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 9 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 25, 19, and 9 fantasy points in the last 3 games. So I like Luis Urias here versus John Lester. Okay, another value play. I like Ramon Urias with a 34% batting advantage over Corey Kluber. Ramon Urias is batting a .856 OPS versus righty pitchers, and Corey Kluber, he pitches his worst ball by far to righty batters, 39% worse than his other pitches, giving up a .878 OPS versus righties. Now there's no at-bats versus Kluber yet, and Ramon Urias is only $2,400 FanDuel salary and only $400 more on DraftKings, projected at 9.2 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 8 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 6, 6, and 6 fantasy points in the last 3 games. And Vegas thinks there's going to be 9.5 runs scored in this game. That's their over-under. So I like Ramon Urias here versus Corey Kluber.
Real quick, guys, I got great news. For a limited time, we're offering a full 30-day trial to Draft Dashboard. You can try all of our DFS tools for all sports. You can try the Position Optimizer, where you can see the top players ranked for each position. And we added a new Player Trends tool, where you can see the top salary differences between FanDuel and DraftKings. It's a really good tool to help you pick out value for the site that you're playing on. Oh, and if you're tired of doing research every day, we just added a cheat sheet that shows hand-picked plays for the slate. No confusing stat lines, no headaches, just a simple cheat sheet that shows the absolute best players for your lineups.
Okay, let's take a look at the third base position. I like Joey Wendell with a 34% batting advantage over a low salary pitcher, Griffin Jax. Joey Wendell is batting 22% better versus righty pitchers, batting a .804 OPS versus righties, and Griffin Jax, he pitches his worst ball versus lefty batters, 12% worse than his other pitches, giving up a 1.045 OPS versus lefties. Now there's no at-bats versus Jax yet, and Joey Wendell is only $2,800 FanDuel salary. He's 1,100 more on DraftKings, projected at 9.7 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 9 fantasy points per game on the season, and he scored 6, 3, and 6 fantasy points in his last 3 games. So I like Joey Wendell here versus Griffin Jax. And you know what? Another guy that's not in a bad spot here tonight, and he looks like he has a pretty decent DraftKings price. I like Josh Donaldson with a 22% batting advantage over Luis Patino. Josh Donaldson is batting 11% better versus righty pitchers, batting a .842 OPS versus righties. And Luis Patino, he pitches 11% worse to righties as he does lefties, giving up a .784 OPS versus righties. Josh Donaldson is 1 for 2 with a 1 OPS versus Patino. He's $3,400 FanDuel salary and only $800 more on DraftKings. Projected at 10.6 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 10 fantasy points per game on the season. He's in a bit of a slump, only scoring 3, 0, and 3 fantasy points in the last 3 games. So I like Josh Donaldson here versus Luis Patino. Okay, let's take a look at the shortstop position. I like Bo Bichette batting against Cole Irving. Bo Bichette is batting 9% better versus lefty pitchers, batting a .876 OPS versus lefties, and Cole Irving, he's giving up a 1.073 OPS versus righties. Now, Bo Bichette is 0 for 3 versus Irving, and he's $4,000 FanDuel salary, $1,500 more on DraftKings, projected at 11.3 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 12 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 15, 12, and 15 fantasy points in his last 3 games. So I like Bo Bichette here versus Cole Irving. Now I also like Gleyber Torres with a 20% batting advantage over a low salary pitcher, Keegan Aiken. Gleyber Torres is batting 7% better versus lefty pitchers, batting a .737 OPS versus lefties, and Keegan Aiken, he pitches 13% worse to righties as he does lefties, giving up a .826 OPS versus righties. Gleyber Torres is 2 for 4, batting .500 with a 1.350 OPS versus Aiken. He's only $3,000 FanDuel salary and only $300 more on DraftKings. So I like that price on both sites. He's projected at 13.4 fantasy points here tonight. He's averaging 8 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 7, 0, and 18 fantasy points in the last 3 games. And Vegas thinks there's going to be 9.5 runs scored in this game. That's their over-under. So I like Gleyber Torres here versus Keegan Aiken. Okay, moving on to the outfield position. Here's a stud pick for you. I like Aaron Judge with a 20% batting advantage over that same low salary pitcher, Keegan Aiken. Aaron Judge is batting 7% better versus lefty pitchers, batting a .950 OPS versus lefties, and Keegan Aiken, we know he pitches 13% worse to righties as he does lefties, giving up a .826 OPS versus righties. Now Aaron Judge is 0 for 2 versus Aiken, and he's $4,400 FanDuel salary, $1,600 more on DraftKings, projected at 11.4 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 12 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 0, 9, and 25 fantasy points in the last 3 games. And we know Vegas thinks there's going to be 9.5 runs scored in this game. That's their over-under. So I like Aaron Judge here versus Keegan Aiken. Now another stud pick, I also like Juan Soto with a 22% batting advantage over Tajon Walker. Juan Soto bats 7% better versus righty pitchers, batting a 1.102 OPS versus righties. And Taijuan Walker, he pitches his worst ball versus lefty batters, 14% worse than his pitch to righties, giving up a .728 OPS versus lefties. Juan Soto is 1 for 3 with a 1 OPS versus Walker. He's 4,300 FanDuel salary, 2,000 more on DraftKings, projected at 13.1 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 13 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 16, 19, and 44 fantasy points in his last 3 games. So I like Juan Soto here versus Taijuan Walker. I also like JD Martinez with a 24% batting advantage over Zach Plesac. JD Martinez is batting 6% better versus righty pitchers, batting a .779 OPS versus righties. And Zach Plesac, he pitches 18% worse to righties as he does lefties, giving up a .632 OPS versus righties. And JD Martinez is 3 for 5, batting 600 with a 2 OPS versus Plesac. He's 3,900 FanDuel salary, 1,200 more on DraftKings, projected at 9.8 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 12 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 6, 3, and 10 fantasy points in his last 3 games. And Vegas thinks there's going to be 9.5 runs scored in this game. That's their over-under. So I like JD Martinez here versus Zach Plesac. Okay, so I wasn't going to give this pick because he's got a relatively tough pitcher matchup, but the splits are fantastic. And this guy's just been on absolute fire, so why not? Take a look at Mark Canha with a 44% batting advantage over Robbie Ray. Mark Canha is batting 12% better versus lefty pitchers, batting a .870 OPS versus lefties. And Robbie Ray, he pitches his worst ball by far to righty batters, 32% worse than his other pitches, giving up a .859 OPS versus righties. Now, Mark Canha is 0 for 3 versus Ray, and he's 3,400 FanDuel salary, only 800 more on DraftKings, projected at 10.9 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 11 fantasy points per game on the season. But man, this guy's been on fire. This is what stuck out. I couldn't scroll down without seeing these eye-popping numbers. He scored 35, 28, and 28 fantasy points in the last 3 games. His price is reasonable. The splits are good. So I think he makes an interesting play here tonight. So I like Mark Canha here versus Robbie Ray. Now I also like Lorenzo Cain with a 47% batting advantage over that low salary pitcher, Jon Lester. Lorenzo Cain is batting 16% better versus lefty pitchers, batting a .866 OPS versus lefties. And Jon Lester, he pitches his worst ball versus righty batters, 30% worse than his other pitches, giving up a .900 OPS versus righties. Now I like this pick because Lorenzo Cain is 14 for 38, batting a .368 batting average and a .915 OPS versus Lester. And he's only 3,000 FanDuel salary, and he's 500 less on DraftKings. So I love that DraftKings price. Projected at 10.3 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 10 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 6, 10, and 47 fantasy points in the last 3 games. So I like Lorenzo Cain here versus Jon Lester. Okay, one more value play. Take a look at Andrew Benintendi with a 16% batting advantage over Dylan Cease. Andrew Benintendi, he bats a little bit better versus righty pitchers, batting a .569 OPS versus righties. And Dylan Cease, he pitches his worst ball versus lefty batters, 15% worse than his other pitches, giving up a .846 OPS versus lefties. And I like this pick because Andrew Benintendi is 4 for 8 with a 1.225 OPS versus Cease, and he's only $2,700 FanDuel salary, $500 more on DraftKings, projected at 9.7 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 9 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 0, 22, and 0 fantasy points in the last 3 games. So I like Andrew Benintendi here versus Dylan Cease.
If you want to try all these daily fantasy tools for yourself, click the link in the description below this video or just go to draftdashboard.com. You can use our DFS lineup optimizer to build quality lineups using our picks and your own custom player pool. Click the link in the description below this video and try all these daily fantasy tools right now. Thanks so much for watching. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel and hit that bell icon so you can get instant updates whenever we post a new video. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this video, please smiggity smash that like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Oh, and please comment below with your favorite player for this NBA slate. I love to hear what you guys have to think. Thanks again, and good luck.